Webster Tarpley is an investigative journalist and lecturer and author. He has researched many of the US presidents, and he has some astonishing theories and facts that few people know. He wrote George Bush Sr., the unauthorized biography, and Obama, the postmodern coup, making of a Manchurian candidate. So you can tell that Webster ain't any kind of orthodox investigative journalist. Let's hear first of all what he thinks of George W. Bush. Webster, thanks very much for joining us from the United States.
Good evening, Right Honourable. How are you?
Very well, and good to hear from you. Now, you won't have had a chance, perhaps, to read all of George W. Bush's pop-up book that he's just released, but insofar as you're aware of it, what do you make of it?
Well, I've tried to read the first few pages, but I was overcome by nausea, so I promise to try again tomorrow. However, I have gotten the gist of it. The main thrust of the book, of course, is self-justification. You're right. I was going to say he was a moron, but if you want to call him an imbecile, I'll certainly concede that point. However, what we're dealing with here is the banality of evil. We have large numbers of people who continue to die every day because of the crimes of Bush. I think the number of civilian casualties in Iraq is up to 1.5 million. The U.S. loss is something like 5,000. And we've got this tragedy going on in Afghanistan. United States is now virtually at war with Pakistan, with Yemen, with Somalia, with really every country around Iran. And all of these things were set into motion by Bush. And in the middle of his book, he does admit that he committed a criminal act, that he authorized the waterboarding, that is to say torture, of this Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Now,
and two others, yes, three people in total.
And others. So
yes.
This is now actionable. This is something that should immediately trigger a criminal indictment. But I have to point out that in the whole catalog of damage done by Bush, the Obama presidency is really one of the greatest examples of the damage. I think people have now woken up from the Obama hysteria of the last 2 years.
Well, just, Webster, we'll come on to that, I promise you. But I just wanted to make one point to you that I learned today from Mr. Taft, who was a top legal man in Bush's administration, who pointed out that the U.S. prosecuted the Japanese at the end of the Second World War on specific charges of having waterboarded prisoners.
Sure.
So the U.S. actually prosecuted and secured convictions of Japanese prison guards for waterboarding as long ago as 1945.
The great principle of international law, of course, is reciprocity, and whatever you do to them, they will do to you. And when I have to debate these neocons here, I ask them, look, you claim that waterboarding is not torture. If they do it to you, is it torture? And then it looks very different. The answer is, oh, well, of course, you can't do that to our forces. Well, that's exactly the nub of the matter. Maybe one big scandal that I was hoping the book might shed light on, but of course it doesn't. The rogue B-52 of August-September 2007, I regard this as the last attempt of Bush-Cheney to start a wider war with Iran. And this was a matter of a B-52 loaded with nuclear cruise missiles, 6 to 8 of them, as I recall, which was essentially hijacked by the faction that speaks through Cheney, the invisible government faction, Wall Street dominated, of course, heavily involved in the CIA and the retired intelligence community. They were able to take a B-52 loaded with nuclear weapons out of the normal command and control procedures of the U.S. Air Force. They moved it from North Dakota to Louisiana. They got it to Barksdale Air Force Base, which is usually the jumping-off point for flights into the Middle East. And you recall, this was about the time, I guess it was the 7th of September 2007, that the Israelis attacked Syria and probably violated the airspace of Turkey. We really could have had a much worse situation. If this rogue B-52 had gotten over to the Middle East, it might have been part of whatever action this was. Now, fortunately, the power relations had shifted here in the ruling elite during the 2006 election. This was mirrored. So by that time, we had Robert Gates at the Pentagon, and his faction was not interested in following the hardline neocon Bush-Cheney approach. So they were able to stop the rogue B-52 on the runway in Louisiana. But, of course, We don't have any investigation of all this. There's never been a congressional hearing. There was a stand down of the entire United States Air Force. There was a purge of generals run by James Schlesinger, an old former Secretary of Defense. There was an immense scandal around this.
That sounds like
a special prosecutor or a probe.
That sounds like a great movie script to me.
Absolutely, and again, it's been lost because it didn't really fit into anybody's ideological agenda at the time. And of course, this again, everything comes back to Obama now. Why has Bush not been prosecuted? Well, Nancy Pelosi said she was going to take impeachment off the table. The impeachment would have been the prelude to something more serious. And of course, Obama has blocked with his Attorney General Eric Holder. This group of so-called Democrats have blocked all the investigations into Bush. So Bush is going to get off scot-free, and he knows.
Why did they do that, Webster? Why did they do that? And not only that, they completely failed to convince the American public immediately after Obama's victory that the wars, the Bush wars and the Bush stewardship of the economy had brought the United States to its knees. Instead, they reached for all this hands across the aisle, bipartisan nonsense.
Sure. That was the cover story for a betrayal that was planned in advance. In the summer of 2007, I traveled around a lot. I was in New York and in San Diego and all kinds of other places. You could see that there was an anti-war movement that reached down deep into the middle class, into normal sort of middle American types, apolitical types. And indeed, the impeach Bush-Cheney was a sign that you could see on suburban lawns. These were not hairy radicals in Greenwich Village or anything like this. This was the middle class interested in accountability. What sucked the oxygen out of the room is Obama. Obama is largely the most successful counterinsurgency deployment we've had here in many a moon. He is a Wall Street puppet. He's a warmonger. He has expanded these wars. He's a union buster. He's been smashing away at the UAW, the United Auto Workers, and above all the teachers union, which is the flagship of the public employees, and he's a Wall Street puppet, as you can see in every conceivable action that he's done. What Obama has done is it functioned as the gravedigger of those rather radical mass movements that were building strength in 2006, 2007. They're all gone. The peace movement here is dead as a doornail and likely to remain so. So are we going
to get Sarah Palin?
No, I don't think so. I think this, you can see that the sort of ogre candidates, right, the Tea Party reactionaries, these are classical Roosevelt-hating, really fascistoid or proto-fascist reactionaries of the type that we had them in the 1930s. They didn't do too well, right? Sharon Angle in in Utah, or Christine O'Donnell, the witch here in Delaware. We had this character Miller with the beard in Alaska, hasn't done too well. Buck in Colorado was another ultra-reactionary. I think that if you look at the neocons, their candidate is General Petraeus. General Petraeus would be the man on horseback, and he would float a little bit over this sort of scurrilous world of these Tea Party hooligans and rowdies that we see, right? This sort of criminal fringe that comes to the fore in the Tea Party, right? Well, one guy gets dressed up as a Nazi, the other one embezzles money from the campaign, one is a witch, one is a racist, of course, on and on. Petraeus would be the equivalent of General Eisenhower. In other words, taking advantage of the scurrilous stuff, but seeming to float above it. And the fact is that the entire neocon faction is now looking at Petraeus as their likely candidate for 2012.
Very interesting.
And he would come in a somewhat unorthodox way. He wouldn't go slogging through the mud of New Hampshire and Iowa, but he would expect some kind of a coronation, some kind of an acclamation. And the Tea Party, mostly Tea Party, very heavily retired military, so they will immediately salute and say, yes, sir, when Petraeus comes on the scene.
Webster, just before I let you go, we're asking the listeners to sum up George W. Bush in 3 words. Could you bring yourself to do so?
An American tragedy.
Okay, Webster Tarpley, investigative journalist, talking about George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. There's only 15 minutes left. If you call me, you might go on. 08717 223344.